Makwa, good evening.
Evening.
Yeah, it's nice to see you again.
Yes,
Thank
same
you.
here. No, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
I hope you are doing well now.
Yes, I'm recovering. At least
Yes.
they can see my face. I can talk.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry.
Yes, no thanks. I know I got all the support, the messages. Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh,
Thank you.
good to see
Thank you,
you. Good to see
Morekwe.
you.
And because we don't want you to talk too much, now we're not going to talk to you anymore. We're only going to be seeing you.
Yes.
And thank you for being able to join us so that we can get to
Yes.
see you. Participants have been sending you lots of good wishes, and we are happy that the prayers have been
Yes.
answered and we can see you. And we know that next week you will probably be joining us much more. So feel free to sit in for as short a time as you possibly can.
Yes.
And then you
No,
can go
thank
and
you.
rest, and I'm sure you can pick it
Yes.
up along the way.
Yes, no, thank
Yeah.
you. Thanks.
Thank you, Morekwe. So Jessica, do we have everybody in?
Yes, everyone that was in the waiting room is in now, and I'll just admit people as we go if they show up in the waiting room. So you guys are good to go.
Okay, thank you. So good evening, everybody. Please ensure that your sound is muted so that we can be able to hear each other. It's good to see you again. And today we introduce ourselves to curriculum. Remember, we are in curriculum 5. We want to introduce ourselves to module 5. If you remember, in the last class or the previous classes, we were looking at screening, and we went through assist very well, and you did a wonderful job. And just last class, we began to introduce ourselves to the concept of assessment and what it's all about. Moses took us through what assessment is all about, what kind of qualities you need to have to be able to do assessment. And we also looked at the 4 critical domains of assessment. And so today, we want to look at one of the validated, tools for doing assessment called the ASI, or Addiction Severity Index. Now, what is ASI about? We're going to be learning that in this class. We're going to learn a little about the history of it, what it's used for, what's the target population, as well as who should use it, who should administer this tool. And then, of course, we shall move to the actual administration, just like we did with the assist. I do hope that every one of us has carried a hard copy of the ASI and your pen, because you're going to be coding as we move along. So welcome to the class. So we're going to quickly look at the objectives, and our proposal is that we are going to walk you quickly through the slides so that we can then have time to do the actual tool, which you have a copy of. So I'll do the first section, and Moses will come in with the second section, and finally we'll do the final section of the actual tool, where I will introduce you to the first part of the ASI, which is the general information section. And then come the next class tomorrow, we'll move to the second section of the medical section, and we keep moving that way until when we are done with all the sections. Usually when we give the ASI, we don't give it that way. We will give it at one sitting. But because we are in a learning experience, we're going to do it this way. So some of the objectives include the following. By the end of the class, we hope that you'll be able, and this is very important, to understand the specific intention of each question in the ASI. When we come to the tool, you're going to notice that sometimes the questions have certain intentions. So if you don't understand the intention of the question and you just take it as face value, then you might as well give the wrong information from the client. Remember that the ASI is administered by a third party or by an interviewer. So the success of the tool and the answers that we get depend on the skill of the interviewer. So this is pretty important for us to understand. Secondly, we need to be able to know that we can adapt each question for each client. Why? Because sometimes the understanding of the client is different. So we are allowed to adapt the language so that we elicit the intention of that question. The other important thing we want you to be able to do is to consistently code. ASI is about putting in a score or even a letter, as the case may be. And this is what is called coding. So we want you to be able to code the ASI and score finally the responses of the client. We also want you to use the results of the ASI to develop treatment plans. Remember, we began with screening. Now we are, and remember our client. We screened and were able to see the areas of no cause for alarm. We saw the areas for brief intervention. And we also saw the areas that required further assessment and treatment. So we're going to work with the same client, and we are going to see how the results of the ASI can be used to develop our client treatment plans. And once again, I thank our client, George, for being there for us and accepting to continue being our client. Now, what is the history of ASI? It was developed originally in 1980 by McClellan and colleagues at the University of Pennsylvania. Now, the initial purpose was actually for purposes of data collection. Now, in 1992, the 5th edition was developed, and in 1997, a smaller version called the ASI Lite was developed. Now, the description of the ASI is that it targets adults. This is important because it has been advised that we should not try to use the ASI for adolescent clients because it is not developed for that population. Initially, it had 200 items. The smaller versions have got less. The time of administration is about 50 minutes to 1 hour. It requires training for administration, and the time required to score or interpret is about 5 minutes for what we call the severity rating that Moses will be telling us about. The other important thing we need to understand is that this tool has been normed across many populations, whether it is inpatient, outpatient, public and private, including even incarceration settings, and so on and so forth. And therefore, it's a tool that can be used across even cultures, like we are going to be realizing. It's been designed to address 7 potential problem areas in clients who use substances. And then in addition to the 7, we also have the general information section, which is usually the beginning. So these 7 problem areas, sometimes they are referred to as 6, because the one on drug use and alcohol use are actually combined. So you might find some literature talking about 6 problem areas, other literature talking about 7. It's all because if you separate alcohol from drugs, then you get 7. If you put them together, then you have 6. So these are the areas: the medical status, employment and support, drug use, alcohol use, legal status, family / social status, and the psychiatric status. So these are the 7 areas we're going to be assessing. And we are going to be doing it very systematically so that we ensure we all understand how to work with each of these areas. The other thing we need to note is that the ASI is actually a comprehensive process. It has been found to be sensitive to all genders, race, ethnic cultures, and even disabilities. It does provide a means to analyze and interpret data. And at the same time, it provides data that is very useful for making treatment recommendations or treatment planning, like we said. Like I said earlier, it's been developed and validated among adults, and it's not developed for adolescents. So it does not have the same credentials for adolescents, and therefore it's not advisable to use it for adolescents. In terms of clinical utility, it's been identified as a brief semi-structured instrument. It's multi-focused, It's sometimes looked at as a screening tool. You can use it as a screening tool at the entrance. If you don't have time to do screening, you can actually use it when you receive your clients. You can actually use it at intake, depending on what your settings are like. And basically, you're using it to collect information, specifically regarding the nature and severity of the substance abuse, which is why it's called Addiction Severity Index, because it looks at the nature of substance use, the severity in terms of how it affects the different problem areas that have been discussed. It's also an evaluation tool, which has actually been found useful for clinical settings, for programs, as well as for research. So you can actually use an ASI at the beginning of a client intake, and you can follow up with another ASI administration after discharge, maybe like a month or 3 months or 6 months. And you can check whether, you can use it to check whether your treatment program had an impact on the client. You can also use it for research purposes. Now, it's good to note that the ASI is actually a psychosocial intake assessment. Why? Because it focuses on a variety of areas. It looks at the mental, it looks at the physical, it does look at the emotional health. And it also does assess the client's perception of the self and ability to function within the community. This is important, and that's why Moses will be telling us about the client severity ratings that ask the client how troubled they are by the issues in their problem area that they have covered. So that's important. Of course, it does gather history of the client because it asks about the past 30 days. It asks about lifetime. It also looks at the current situation of the client and basically gives a very comprehensive picture of the client. Please note that the ASI cannot be self-administered. It is designed to be used as an interview. This is because it is sensitive to problems of illiteracy. It does acknowledge that sometimes clients may not understand some of the questions, and therefore they need a third party who has got competencies to be able to understand the intention of the question and be able to explain that to the client. It also avoids problems of attention, interest, and comprehension. So by being an interview rather than a self-administered tool, if the client has problems with attention, a problem with interest, or a problem with comprehension, the interviewer can notice and make necessary adjustments. Now, the other thing the interviewer does is to ensure that the questions are understood and understood as they were intended. That's very important. It also captures the general demeanor of the client. In fact, the ASI allows you to make notes. It has a section where it allows you to put notes for every question, where you capture or your observations about the client as you're carrying on the interview. And of course, it allows for personal contact, which is very important. When you have personal contact, you can get a lot of additional information that you may not necessarily get if the person just responded to the question without you seeing them. So we are not going to develop a case study. Now, if you're training in your institutions, you're supposed to take people to resource page 5.2, ask them to develop a case study based on the questions that are posed there. And that case study is the one you're supposed to use throughout the administration of the ASI. We are very lucky, extremely lucky, because we have a live case here in the name of George. And so once again, George, thank you very much for being there for us. Now, very important is to think about your role as an interviewer. If you get it right as an interviewer, then you get it right with ASI. If you don't get it right, then we don't get it right with the ASI. And therefore, this slide is emphasizing your responsibility as the person conducting the interview. In fact, if you look at the first bullet, it says that it is your responsibility to ensure the information that you collect is information of integrity. It challenges us to be willing to repeat the question, to paraphrase for the client, to probe. In fact, there's a participant who asked about assist, whether you can translate into the language the client can understand. Yes, you can, because by so doing, you're going to protect the integrity of the information the client gives you, because you're going to try and ensure the client understands each question. So you have to be satisfied that the client has understood each question. You have to ensure that the answers reflect the best judgment of the client. So if you think the client has not understood the question, please don't just score that question. Take time to make them understand. Repeat the question, put it in other words or paraphrase it. Probe a little more so that you're sure that what the client gives you is the best judgment around that question. You also need to ensure that answers are consistent with the intention of the questions. For example, in the general section, we are going to see a question that asks the client that whether in the last couple of days, they have been in an area that was controlled or in an environment that was controlled. The client may not understand what controlled environment is. You can actually give examples. For example, ask them, might you have been admitted in a hospital? Might you have been in jail? Might you have been in a treatment setting? So you give examples to prompt them to understand what you are actually asking. You as an interviewer have a responsibility to ensure that you understand the intention of the question. Be alert to any new exceptions or situations. Sometimes the client may become difficult. Maybe you may discover the client has problems with concentration. Be aware of those situations because they could have an impact on the responses the client gives you. You need to probe for the most complete information available from the client. So don't be in a hurry. Take your time so that the client gives you the information that is most complete. You're free to ask additional questions so that you effectively evaluate the area you're interviewing about. And of course, record the most appropriate answers, including any comments that may be useful. And when you're recording the comment, you need to record the question against those comments so that the comments can be tied to the specific responses. Now, what are the qualities of a proficient interviewer? Being personable, really, that's just about being pleasant and warm. Being supportive. If you come out as hostile to the client, it's unlikely that they will give you accurate information. You need to also create rapport with a variety of clients. Just remember, our clients come in all types, sizes, and shapes. You know, sometimes I tell my students when they complain about lecturers, and we all coming from the university understand this. So they will complain, especially when I was head of my department, lecturer X is not good, lecturer Y like that. And I would tell them, you know what? Your lecturers will come in all types and shapes and sizes. It is your responsibility to adjust and fit in. So in the same way, our clients will come in all types or ranges or sizes or, characters. And it is our responsibility to be able to form good rapport with all of them. The onus is on us. We also need to help the client separate the problem areas and examine them individually. Now, what does this mean? If, for example, you are working on the area of medical issues or medical related problems, the client may want to mix the medical problems with their family social problems. It is your responsibility to help them look at each of these areas separately because you're going to be scoring each of them separately. It's also your responsibility to understand the meaning of each question so that by the time you're posing that question to the client, yourself, you understand the intention and you're sure that you're collecting information in a manner that is responsible and accurate. So in this final slide, you're supposed to actually role play, and you can do this when you go back to your universities. You can have your participants have 3 people or form groups of 3. One will act as the client, the other one is the interviewer, the third is the observer. The work of the observer is to comment on the process and give feedback. Now you need to do that and switch roles 3 times so that everyone gets to play each of the 3 roles. So that you can do back home in your training. So thank you very much. And I think I have one more final reflective exercise for you here, which I think you can do in just 2 minutes. You can type in your chat, you can put in your journal, because this is very important for our personal development. So the first question here asks us, what qualities do you have? This is now individual, that make you an effective interviewer. So look at yourself critically. Ask yourself, do I have the qualities that make me an effective interviewer? Which ones are they? Secondly, what qualities can make me even more effective in my interviewing? So this is like asking, where can I improve? And the third point is asking, what are your greatest challenges to being an effective interviewer? So in this question, we are looking at ourselves and saying, this is where I have difficulties. So this is where I would need to improve. So very quickly in 1 minute, can anybody share? You can raise your hand and share with us on any one of these 3 questions. Yeah, or you can also type in your chat. Fatma, yes, Fatima?
Yes, like personally, I think I have the quality of empathy. You know, in interviewing someone, you have to be empathetic with them. I remember during the COVID-19 period, a client came into my office, so I assigned him to another counselor. So as the guy was coming close to the counselor, he said, please carry your chair, sit at the other side, you know, because of the social distance issue. So, you know, after the session, I told him, you shouldn't have talked to the man like that. You know, you were so irritating. So if you are empathic as a counselor, you'll be able to know what the client is feeling as you are interviewing him. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So you're empathic. I can also see someone else has typed that One of their skills is empathy. Another one is saying they are passionate in listening. Another one says they have patience and empathy. Another one says they have a quality of being patient. Thank you. Now, what are the skills you would like to do more? Yes, someone here says, I need to learn more of amplified empathy. Okay. Another example of something you want to improve on? Yes. Anybody else who wants to improve on something? Yes, it's important. We look at what we have and we also look at what we would like to improve on. That's very important as part of self-reflection. Yes, I can see someone says they're a good listener, they are patient. Another one says they're good in rolling with resistance. Another one needs to improve on reflection. Another one in capital letters says need to be more patient. I like that. That's very genuine. We need to be genuine with ourselves and look at areas that we need to do. Someone else says my challenge is listening due to emotion attached. If it is a relapse, another one says improve company. And so we need to think about all the things that we need to improve in order to make ourselves better interviewers. If we learn to pick from ourselves or for ourselves the areas that we are strong and the areas that we are not strong and the areas we want to make better, then that's how we become better and better interviewers and are able to administer ASI and do very many other things. So thank you very much. I now hand it over to Moses to take it up. Moses?
Yes, Beatrice, thank you very much for that introduction. We now go to the client severity index now. Let me share my screen so that I can move on. So we'll be talking about client severity ratings. This is a response card. You recall that we had one, some while we introduced the assist and administered it. So in a similar vein, the ASI has response card, and this guides the client or the patient to be able to give, answers or responses to questions, and it helps us to get both the objective, subjective, and objective assessment, from the client, and that whatever the client says is actually very important. And what we're going to be doing is that we're not imposing it on the client, but the client knows that he has to rate, himself, and we're not in a hurry to make them rate themselves, but they have to tell us how important or how they see their own problems. And the severity rate is only tells us, about the need for treatment. If they're not already, having one, then we now know that we need to treat them. But if they're on treatment, it might suggest that we have to do something else or refer them to other places where they can get better treatment. So the severity actually tells us, what kind of treatment, but the client's responses are very important. So you'll be seeing all these the ratings for almost every part of the assist, and these are the sample questions. For instance, number one, say how troubled or bothered have you been about this problem area in the past 30 days? You will be asking for different domains, asking questions like this.
Hey,
And
Moses.
then, yes, please.
Sorry to interrupt you. You're pretty garbled. I think it might help if you turn your video off. To
My video, I thought it's off.
Oh, to send more of your bandwidth towards your audio. It might help a bit.
Okay. Let me attempt to end the show and share again. I don't know, but I thought my video was off.
Yeah, it usually turns off automatically, I think.
Yes. Okay, I'll go back sharing again. Sorry.
Okay, perfect. No problem. Thank you.
Okay. So here you find that you first of all ask how troubled or bothered the client has been. And there are two time frames. One is 30 days. The other one is lifetime, as you go along. So how troubled or bothered have you been about this problem area in the past 30 days? And then the client tells you he's really bothered. Then you also ask him to indicate on the response card, not at all, slightly, moderately, considerably, or extremely. And then how important is it to receive treatment for this problem area? Then they rate their responses here. And it helps you to know that this is something that has been validated and shown to be something that, is very valid. It's not yes or no, or I'm bothered, no. But, there are a different severity indexes here. In fact, 0 is not at all, but 4 is when the client is extremely either bothered about or troubled about the problem, or how important it is for the client to actually receive treatment. So this guides you, and it helps the client to come out to know that we really rely on him, and it must not be forced, to answer questions, and it must not be seen to insist that he must complete the ASI. So let the responses be truthful and give them time to actually respond accurately, and they give them various, it's a Likert-like scale, so that they have a lot of choices, 5 of them to make. And the severity ratings is actually subjective assessments are significant. They make their subjective assessments, but you also ask them to rate them, then you can assess them objectively. A 5-point scale has been proven to be a reliable and valid scale. It's not yes or no, or mild, moderate, or severe. No, but you see, it's a 5-point scale. And it is important to describe scale and its values. So 1 is not at all, and then the number 4 is, severe or extremely so for the client, so that you know what the need of the client is all about. If he thinks he has a problem, or he doesn't have a problem at all, and if he has a problem, how serious is the problem? Possible problems with severity ratings. Yes, clients can, give responses in various ways, but the rating should not be based on his or her perception of any other problem. The responses must be based on the questions that are asked. So it's not to link it to something else, but focus on the question being asked. That's where we want, the response. And each rating is to be considered a separate problem area, and to have occurred in a specific period, the past 30 days or lifetime. The past 30 days, which if that means that the problem is still ongoing, or it's an issue to the client now. But lifetime means count, let's say, 31 days from now, backwards. So, from 31 days backwards, of in your whole life up to 31 days ago, that means lifetime. But 30 days backward, or 30 days from today, it means 30 days, current problem. But you have to be able to clarify it for the clients, because when you say lifetime or 30 days, let them not mix it. Say, okay, I've been having this problem up to maybe 20 days ago. No, if you say up to 20 days ago, it's still within the 30 days. But up to maybe 31 days ago is lifetime. But up to 30 days ago is, 30 days, is what you are considering as a current problem. So these are 2 separate time frames that you have to clarify for the client. And a question is coded as 0 if the client states that the event has not occurred in the past 30 days. But you need to probe and find out, not even in 15 days ago, whatever, and be sure that the responses are correct. Sometimes they may need prompting to help them make some recall and give you the right answers. But be sure that you get the right answers and they're truthful, and the client is not, coerced, just to complete the ASI for the sake of completion. You have to verify the answers. You can ask confirmatory questions, find out how it happened or when, and be sure that the client is not missing things up for you. And if client cannot assign a rating, if after you've asked all questions and you try to explain, you try to paraphrase, and the client is resistant, doesn't want to answer such questions, then you insert an X for that question. That means that question has not been answered, but you don't have to force them to complete it. And then suggest time restructuring mechanisms. You can find out maybe in the last 15 days or half of the time, and try to let them, concentrate on the answer or the question being asked. Because sometimes when you do that, they may be able to come up with a response for you. And maybe also, maybe even at weekends, not necessarily weekdays, but weekends, or maybe half of 15 days, maybe the past 2 weeks, so on and so forth, you can help them. And that will help them to be able to make recall if they are having some difficulty recalling whatever has happened or they are experiencing. And they refrain from imposing responses on the client, help select an estimate without forcing a response. Demonstration of client severity ratings. Here is an exercise. Then you have a volunteer needed to be a client. If you are doing this in maybe as face-to-face presentation, then you have a volunteer to be able to do this role play. One will volunteer, to be a client, and then the instructor focuses on one problem area. And after a discussion on the problem area, then you now bring your severity rating questions and ask, how bothered have you been regarding this problem area in the past 30 days? How important is it that you receive treatment for this problem area? I may say, well, it's important or not important to me at all. So you look at the severity rating based on the response card that we started with earlier, and then that will guide you to rate the responses, objectively. Introducing the client to the ASI, it helps to set you help as an interviewer to set the tone and prepare him for what it's all about. Just like Beatrice, has given us some introduction about the ASI, you have to prepare, his mind, what time it's going to take. Every client, is administered the same ASI once they come to a treatment facility. So you are not just targeting them because you may ask some questions that might be embarrassing to them, or they don't, doesn't really involve them, and they may be taken aback at such questions. And so you have to, reassure them that this set of questions are asked for every client, that comes to your own treatment facility. But if it's not applicable to them, there's no problem at all. And provide the guidelines on how these questions are asked. Introduce them to the severity index, the response card, and how they'll be used. If you ask questions, they will have to look at it and then rate it for you, and so that you elicit their own cooperation and you are getting information and tell them they need to answer the questions truthfully. And it's desirable that they answer all questions if they can, but if the question involves a lot of emotions and they are not able to answer, or they want to avoid that question, then please just mark an X and skip it. Don't push them, or cause them to complete it. Provide a clear idea of what to expect from the interview. And why are you doing the interview? Because we want to know what's happening to the client. It's not just the drug issue. We want to know what's happening to them, about how it affects their job, their family life, whether there are other medical problems associated apart from drug use, and whether there are other mental health issues or even legal problems. So you want to know the patient as much as you can and how this behavior has affected him, every facet of his life, so that you can actually give him the best you can, and it helps to plan, for treatment with the cooperation of the client, and to know what you are heading to or what you aim to achieve after collecting the information, and builds rapport with the client. Yes, you must be able to do rapport, because the questions sometimes can be irritating to some people, and for some people, it's like, especially to them who have maybe co-occurring anxiety disorders, or maybe having some depression that has not been lifted, or even may suffer from co-occurring schizophrenia, asking them so many questions, sometimes they become irritable or they become disinterested in the question. So you must be able to, establish the rapport and the trust to be able, to move on. So you have to be patient, as some of us said. You have to be patient with them and empathize with them, so that you can flow along. And that ensures standardization of the process. That the process is a standardized one and is conducted for every client that comes. There are 7 points, that needs to be noted and very important when administering the ASR. Number 1, the same interview used for all clients, as I said earlier, is not a test. So nobody fails, nobody gets a 0, nobody fails the interview as such. So let them be aware that it is not a test to test their ability or maybe the IQ, whatever it is. No, it's just a standardized thing for every client, so that they can feel relaxed and be at home. And then there are 7 sections, as Beatrice said. Some will say maybe 6 sections if they condense the one for substance use and alcohol. Well, 7 sections in the one we're using, and it takes approximately 15 minutes to an hour. So you prepare their mind that they'll be with you for the next 50 minutes to 1 hour. And so they see, their cooperation in administering the ASR. And the patient client rating scale, yes, introduce them to it and what is required of them. Let us see it and they describe it and why it is scaled that way, so that they can give honest responses for you to be able to assess them objectively. And confidentiality, right to refuse to answer. Yes, we are not coercing anyone to answer. And the 2 time frames, the past 30 days and lifetime, as you explained earlier. So let's go and see, to them and see what they actually mean. First point, all clients get the same interview. Minimize surprise by some of the, this will minimize surprise by some of the questions, because, for instance, if you ask questions that have to do maybe with criminal behavior and the client has never engaged in any criminal act, they can be taken aback or they may feel offended. Why is he asking me? But you tell them that these questions are for everybody. And that's why when you administer them, you watch their demeanor, how they respond, and everything about them, their body language. And it's not something, as Bitu said, that you just give the client, say, complete this question. No, you have to be trained. You have to interview the client, and you must develop the skills to be able to administer the ASI. If you do it frequently, then you get to know that it is not as difficult as so, because you will get conversant with most of the questions, and then it will flow very easily and naturally for you. And also, if clients are surprised, refer them back to the introductory statement for everyone. And they let the clients know that some questions may not apply to them, really. So if it doesn't apply to them, no problem at all. Let them just, move on. So let's review the 7 sections. General information. We have general information about the client. You get maybe social demographic data and so many things you can get from them. And then you also look at their medical history, and you also want to look about the section that involves their employment, or if they are not employed, if they have some social supports, and then alcohol use and drugs, legal, family, and social issues, and mental health, psychiatric problems. And recall that BT said it's not for adolescents, but it's for adults. That's why you'll be talking about employment and so on and so forth, family, social support. The length of the interview is just approximately 50 minutes to an hour to conduct the assessment. So prepare their minds, so that they will be able to sit all through the interview. As I said, some of them might have some anxiety problems, or some of them are not even motivated because they are still depressed and they don't have interest in anything around them. Or some of them may even be having some psychotic disorders. For instance, those of them who might suffer from co-occurring schizophrenia, and they completely are not interested in what you are doing. So you have to be sure that they are ready for the ASI. But if they're not ready, you don't have to continue until such a time that you think they are prepared to take the test, so that you don't give false responses. And then patient client rating scale. Yes, explain to them the 5-point rating scale as we said earlier. This encourages clients to share their opinions about what is being discussed. Because when you ask them how important, is it to them, they're able to open up, and tell you, and then you ask them to rate it. And also, if they think they desire treatment, then they tell you, and they also help you to score, to rate it. Then you score and have an objective, recording of the interview. And let class know their opinions and perceptions are important. You are not just asking the questions and then making up your mind. They are the ones that raise whatever problems there are. If you have any doubts or is there any confusion, you try to clarify and then make sure that they understand the question very well. And as Beatrice said earlier, you can paraphrase for them, you can explain and ensure that you speak to them in a language that they understand, so that they'll be able to give you the correct responses. Their opinions and their perceptions of their problems are very important. No one is imposing it on them. The 5th point, confidentiality. You have to explain as an interviewer what it means, at your own facility. I don't know, it depends. There are different settings. Some of us might just have maybe a counseling outfit, but for those of us who are in treatment setting, we have minimum standards for practice, and one of the minimum standards is confidentiality, which we discuss with all the staff in the treatment center. In fact, from the security men to the kitchen staff to cleaners to therapists and everybody, administrators, this issue of confidentiality is what we discuss, and we go through the minimum standards required for us to practice, in our country from time to time, to ensure that you cannot take this information and share it with anybody, and not everyone has access to the information you are obtaining from the client. And let them know that you might be practicing as a team, and you'll be able to share the information you get with the team, so that everybody contributes, from their own professional perspective or angle, and give the client the best. And if there are limits to it, maybe due to legal problems or whatever, then you have to let the client know the limit of this confidentiality. And let clients know who will have access to this information. Yes, in my setting, we practice as a team. So the team members will have access to the information, and from time to time, weekly, we meet with the client, and all the team members will sit and discuss the client together, with the client there, and they will bring ideas and then find out what we're doing, how everyone is doing, and then see, which way, to move forward with the treatment plan for the client. And if there are problems or challenges, we know where the challenges are coming from, and then we set out to see how we can meet those challenges. So if you do that, the client, usually will not be bothered, because every member of the team, has access, and then you discuss everything with the client, in attendance. So that helps them, to understand that, yes, this thing, ends here and should not be heard of outside. And explain limits to the confidentiality. As I said, there might be a legal requirement that if there are issues, the court must summon some information from you, and then you know your limits depending on the law of the land. And the sixth point, client may refuse to answer some questions. Yes, they have the right not to answer questions. If at that moment, the question you ask evoke a lot of emotional responses and they are not prepared to answer those questions, they are free not to respond to those questions at that time. So they have the freedom, and let them know that no one is forcing them to complete it for completion's sake, but that every information is important so that we can make the best use of whatever we have in the treatment planning. And some questions may be too personal to answer. The interviewer now places an X in the box and moves on. That you may come back maybe sometime later when he's prepared to open up. And usually, you build a rapport over time, and you add trust over time, and the therapeutic alliance, continues to build up. So there are times that they may not be able to give you some responses because they have not known you yet, and they're still trying to study the kind of person you are, what is setting. But once you're able to establish rapport and that trust relationship, a hidden relationship, and the therapeutic alliance, you may come back to it and they'll volunteer the information without hesitation. It happens from time to time. And the interviewer reinforces the importance of obtaining as much honest information as possible. They shouldn't make up. If they are not willing or they don't feel free to respond, they're free not to respond to such questions. So honest answers are important so that it will help us to fashion or design a treatment plan with the collaboration of the client. 2 time frames, I've said 2 separate time frames. Past 30 days, lifetime equals the entire life up to until 30 days ago. Yes. But anything from 31 days ago is lifetime. But anything 30 days ago is not lifetime. So the client must be clear about these 2 time periods. Some behavior only in the past 30 days, and some behavior only up until 30 days ago. And the follow-up, explain to clients if follow-up will be used, because there are times that you might assess a client, and after you assess and you carry out a treatment plan, after some time or some months, you should, if you want, you can administer the SI and see whether you have made progress or whether there are changes in the different domains and whether the treatment has actually made any impact on the client or not. And you can also use that for research purposes and see, what is happening at intake and when the first assessment is done, and maybe 3 months, 6 months, or even 9 months after the first treatment or the assessment, you can repeat it and see, how far the scoring and everything has changed, and whether you are not making any impact or things are getting worse, or you are making progress. But the assist should not be repeated, less than 1 month, after the first administration. You ask for permission to do that in advance, that you will be repeating it maybe sometime in the future. If you know the time frame you want to administer, then you can let them know, but seek their permission. And minimum of 30 days after initial interview and assess experience since treatment. That they will be able to tell you, and even when you are repeating the the ASI, some questions you may have to reframe them because you have already intervened in the life of the client since the first assessment. So, and make sure that the questions are actually very clear to the client, and they refresh questions as are needed. We do that in our center for research purposes. We're able to administer, and then sometime later again, maybe 6 months, 9 months, we administer again to find out why there are changes, because we are keeping the data to see whether we're making progress or making sense or just confusing the client. When to end the interview? End the interview if the client misrepresents the section. There are times that particularly some patients who may have some co-occurring disorders might not really give you correct answers. Or some of them may even have personality problems. And deliberately, they may give you responses that are not desirable. So if such happens, you can end the interview. It is clear that the client does not understand the questions after 2 sections. You are not able to explain, or maybe at the stage in which the client comes, he is not yet stable mentally to be able to go through the SI. If the client comes and has a co-occurring problem, is still deluded, still hallucinating, or still severely depressed, whatever it is, and so anxious, tense, you don't have to complete the SI until they are ready or in the right frame of mind actually to answer. And if you're not making progress, maybe somebody who understands the client better might be able to administer the ASI. So this is a small group exercise. We are supposed to have an interviewer, a client, and an observer. In your own different settings, when you go to practice or to train, you'll be able to carry out this exercise. You have an interviewer, you have one who serves as the client, and then one as an observer, and you try to role play your case, not the case that BT talked about, and you cannot administer the ASI to each other. Take turns to administer it, and then one serves as an observer, and he observes and then gives you feedback about how the process goes. And if you do that, you'll be able to know and be able to know where you make mistakes or where you don't understand the ASI well, and you'll be able to correct such mistakes so that you can administer it well. An interviewer introduced the ASI by following the 6 points that we have just discussed. And then the observer is able to take notes and provide feedback. So you give them time after doing this in role play, they'll be able to present their case and give feedback so that you get to know how easy or how difficult it is to administer the ASI. And then what it means actually for the client. If you are the client, then you now know whether it is something that is very pleasant or not, to take the ASI. And then interviewer instructions. 1, leave no blanks. Try as hard as you can to fill every space. And then mark an X if the question is not answered. If you have explained and you've tried to maybe rephrase, paraphrase, and yes, the client has not answered or is resistant, then you don't have to push too hard for the client to respond to the question. So you put an X, which signifies that that particular section has not been answered. Then mark an N or NN if the question is not applicable. Why N or double N? If the space is just a box, you mark an N. But if there are 2 boxes, then you can mark a double N if the question is not applicable to the client. And then follow the half-time rule by rounding up. If it's, for instance, you are asking about a 30-day period, and then the client says, yeah, in the last 14 days or 15 days, you round it up. You round it up. And also note that a bullet indicates hints and clarification. Where there's a bullet, there might be some explanations or some notes that you have to read and clarify what the question is all about to the client. So if you look at the ASI, you will see some places that have this bullet. So look at the notes there, make sure you read them, you understand them, and explain clearly to the client. That helps to clarify things and avoid confusion. Leave no blanks. Code all boxes for questions not answered. If a question asks for number of months and the answer is 1 month, code 01. Then you probe for essential and valid information. And you can adjust questions as necessary, depending on the literacy level or the understanding of the client. You can rephrase, you can paraphrase, whatever, so that they understand, and help them to actually get the very essence of that question and give a correct response. Mark an X if a client cannot answer a question, probe further to get an answer. You can rephrase the question to make it more understandable. But if the client still cannot answer, code an X. You don't have to continue to push for them to answer it at all costs. And then an N or NN, code N or NN when the question does not apply to the client. Follow the instructions on the air side to ensure that an N or double N code is appropriate. As I said, if it's just a box provided, then you code N. But if there are 2 boxes but not applicable, then you write the double N there. Review resource page 6.5, coding N reference sheet. If you go to resource page 6.5, it will tell you, things that you can code, it's not applicable. And always try to go back to your resource page and review them, because it gives you a clearer picture and some of the information is condensed so that you get to know, what is done. Because we are rushing through this, but if you read it, you get a better understanding and more information about what is needed, and it makes the information or the presentation clearer for you. And follow the half-time rule. Run periods of 14 days or more up to 1 month, and run periods of 6 months or more up to 1 year. So if it's just 14 days, say 14 days or 15 days, 16, 17, run it up to a month. Anything 6 months or above, more than that, just make it up to 1 year, where you need to code in years or in months. And then note that a bullet indicates hints and clarifications, as we said earlier, and the many questions on the air side have hints or clarification notes under the question. So those notes help you to clarify, because they may be confusing to the client. So you have to read them and clarify and explain, to the client. And this notes give examples of questions or further explain the issue that the question is addressing. There are other sections in the ASI. Always says job categories. We tell you the kind of, for instance, the different job categories. Then a list of commonly used drugs. Some of them, well, there are others that may not be captured, but you get a list of commonly used drugs so that you can read them to the client, and especially where they're in groups. And then drug use and alcohol instructions. So those sections, you need to study them and ask the questions, appropriately. Yes, it is we pick up from here. Thank you very much for paying attention to all this presentation. You need to actually ensure that you grasp it, and it's not something that we do in a hurry, but be able to score it rightly. So it is we further, present the administration of the ASI class. So Beatrice, please take over from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Moses. Kindly allow me to share screen. Thank you. So I'm going to continue from where Moses has stopped. Thank you very much, Moses, for that elaborate presentation that has introduced us to how to administer the ASI. So I'm just going to quickly run through, administering the ASI, particularly the first section of it, which is the general section. And then we shall quickly now go to the actual task to do it together. So you have been reminded many times that the ASI is an interview. An interview is a conversation. Understand the intent of each question. You can see how much this is repeated because it is so important. You're also reminded to pose your questions in a way that is direct, but not confrontational. And of course, encourage to use probes, so that the client understands. And to also be able to understand the suggested solutions for difficult coding issues that may arise. And I think Moses has given us examples. And then you can also use what are called internal cross-checks to verify information. And we are going to see an example soon. Now so this is basically what we do. When you reach the general information section, you introduce the client. And you tell the client, let's get started by gathering some information about you. And then you gather the demographic information. The sections of the ASI are coded based on the area. For example, general information has the code G. When you come to medical information, it has the code M. When you come to legal information, it has L, and so on and so forth. So in this G section, it's basically general information. So you have G1 up to 10 for demographics. Then you have G13 to 14, which is talking about their living circumstances. Now, G1 and 2 are open questions and may be used as needed, and we are going to see that. And then, G1 is basically where the program has an ID number for their client. So you might discover this client might have a number, so you use that number. Now, the other G2 code sometimes could be it's given here as a social security number. In our countries, we have different types of numbers for identification. So you may want to give your ID, like in my country, we have what is called national identification number. So that's what we would use in my country. In different countries, you can use different things, but they are not coded really. Then G4 and G5 is trying to track the time between the interview and admission. So one of them asks, when was the date of admission? The other one asks for the date of the interview. It also goes further to give the time the interview begins and the time the interview ends, which are good pointers to the mental status or cognitive ability of your client. Now, the date of admission and the date of the interview are important because they help us to know whether was the client interviewed and then it took very long before they were admitted. Why? So it helps give a lot of insights. G6 and G7, of course, I have said they track the time the interview began and ended. Then G8 tracks whether the interview is an intake interview or a follow-up interview, and Moses has already told us that. And then G9 tracks the type of contact. Are you doing a face-to-face? Are you doing a telephone interview? But you have been reminded that intake ASI must be conducted face-to-face. Follow-up ASI can actually be a telephone interview. G10 tracks the gender, and you're reminded that the options here are limited to male and female, but you can't force a client to choose. So if the client does not identify with either of the two, you just code an X, like Moses has advised us. G14 and 15 are tracking the client's living situation. And this is important information, like we are going to be seeing. G16 is talking about the date of birth. Now, if the client does not know the date of birth, and some clients may not, like if you get clients who have come from, live in street circumstances, they might not even have parents to tell them when they were born. They don't even have certification. So they may not know their date of birth. You code with an X as we have been advised. G17 asks the client their race, ethnicity, or nationality. And you are being reminded, issues of race and ethnicity can be very delicate. So it is not a requirement that the client must answer that question. The question is written to accommodate various countries' preferences. And the same with the next question about religious preference. Again, it is not a must that the client gives their religious preference. Now, G19 and 20 are trying to, the intention of this question is to find out whether in the last 30 days, the client has been in an environment where access to alcohol and drugs was prohibited or restricted. This is important because you remember in the section of alcohol and drugs, clients will be asked about last 30 days. So if the client says in the last 30 days, I have not used a substance, and you missed to know in the general section it's because they were in a regulated environment, then you will actually miss out a client who has a problem. So you must understand that intention of that question. So read the question as it's written, but give the client examples of the controlled environments. And we are also saying that the following environments are not considered controlled environments. For example, if you've been in prison and then you have been given work release, or you're in a recovery house. So these are not necessarily controlled because you can still access substances. Now, you're also reminded that for G19 and 20, if the client was in more than one controlled environment in the last 30 days, for example, maybe they were admitted in a hospital for some time and they were also in a treatment program for SUD, those are two places. You need to record where they spent the longer time, but when it comes to the number of days, you add up the total for all those settings. Now, at the end of it, you can cross-check this general information with other sections of the ASI. For example, you can cross-check general information with all other ASI questions that will be asking about the past 30 days, because you can see here, there was a question on the last 30 days. You can also cross-check with other questions that refer to a controlled environment. And you can also cross-check with the questions in the legal section, if at all the client was incarcerated. So if they miss to tell you here they were incarcerated, then in the legal section, they bring out incarceration in the last 30 days, then you can see now you need to cross-check and get the correct information and clarify. So basically, that's where we are. And I want to stop there and now go to the tool. So kindly take up your tool, and I'm going to be sharing a soft copy of it so that we are moving together. And at this point, I'm going to be requesting our very able client, George, to say hello to us as I welcome him to today's session. So George, please say hello to us.
Yeah, hello everybody.
Hello. Nice to see you, George.
Thank you very
Great.
much.
So before I start talking to George, I want to introduce participants to this first page of the ASI. I believe you can see there are 4 boxes of the first page. On the first box here, to the left top side, it is giving you the information of how you introduce the client to the ASI. Now, that I will do to George when we begin the session. Then below that, you can see it gives you instructions as an interviewer. It tells you the things Moses has told us. For example, don't leave any blanks, make plenty of comments, and you can see when you open your first page of your ASI where you begin the general information, you will see there are lots of spaces provided for you to make notes. You're encouraged to make notes. Then, of course, you've been told if a question isn't answered, put an X. If it's not applicable, put N. And you've also been told if the client misrepresents 2 or more sections, please stop the interview. And some of the misrepresentation could be because of poor understanding, could be because of a poor grasp of the meaning of the questions, could be because they have concentration difficulties, could be because, like Moses said, they have co-occurring disorders that are impairing them. So if that happens and you see you're not getting anywhere, then you stop the interview. And then Moses has also told us where we see a bullet, we have been given explanatory notes. I think the other thing that has been given here that I should talk about is the interviewer ratings. So other than the client ratings that are given at the end of every section, we also have your ratings as an interviewer. In these interviewer ratings, you're supposed to give a general picture. For example, what is your general impression of the client? Do you think the client is in need for help in that specific problem area? If, for example, it was medical section, at the end of it, it asks you, how would you rate the patient's need for medical treatment? And you use this scale. 0 to 1 if there is no problem, 2 to 3 slight problem, 4 to 5 moderate, 6 to 7 severe, and 8 to 9 extreme. And you're going to notice that at the end of every section, there will be the place for the client ratings and, of course, the interviewer rating. I think the other one is the halftime rule Moses has told us. If you're required to give a number, like number of months, or in terms of months, and the client talks about 14 days or 15 days, you round that off to a month. If you're supposed to give in terms of year, then there are 6 months, and anything above that, you round to 1 year. The other one is the confidence ratings. I think that we've already been told, and you're being told to be careful not to overinterpret the client's ratings. Now, if the client denies information, don't assume they are lying or misrepresenting. And we have been told that for you to say they are misrepresenting, you should be able to have overt or explicit contradictions in the information that they give. And a final advice, please make plenty of comments. So you are free to keep adding comments. So having said that now, allow me, now the other thing, I will introduce you to the other box, the one at the right-hand corner. Moses has talked about it. That's the list commonly used drugs. You will need this for the alcohol and drugs section. And of course, the final one at the right-hand side at the bottom, again, you will need that for the alcohol and drugs section. So now I'm going to go to the first section, which is introducing my client, George, to the ASI. So are we ready? I hope we are. So welcome, George, to this session. I want to thank you for the time you have taken to take this exercise with me. I want to let you know that you're welcome and just let you know that you feel comfortable. What we shall be doing is that to be able to provide good services to you, we do need to get some more information about you. Remember in the last section or in the last session we got some information which we filled a tool that was called the Assist together. And thank you very much because you are very, very helpful in the responses you gave and you are very honest. So today we are going to be further collecting more information from you that will help us to assist you even better. So I have a tool with me here. It is called the ASI and we are going to be filling it together. I will be asking you questions and as you answer, I am going to be writing. Please feel free to stop me at any point to discuss the issues we shall be talking about. So this tool or this ASI has 7 potential problem areas. Areas where when we use substances, we could be affected. It has got a section that is general, and then it has a section that I'm going to be asking you about medical issues. Another section, I'll be asking you about employment and support. I will also ask you about alcohol and drugs in another section. And in another section, I'll ask you about legal issues, as well as family, and also psychological issues. Please note, George, that this ASI is used for all the clients we admit in this center. So should you find that a question I ask you sounds awkward, it's not because I mean to ask you an awkward question, it's just that the tool we use is the same. So you're free to let me know if that question does not apply to you. I also wish to assure you that all the questions and the information we collect from you will be used and treated with confidentiality and only shared amongst we counselors who will be helping you. Now, as we work on this activity, we will be discussing 2 time periods. The first one is the last 30 days. And you might look at the calendar and see when the last 30 days happened. And we shall also be talking about what we are calling lifetime data. Now, lifetime means any period after the 30 days or before the 30 days. So you can also think about that so that you can be able to answer these questions. Now, your information is very important, George. So at the end of each section, I'm going to be asking you to use this skill, the one that I am just giving you now, to give me your idea of how disturbed you are by the issues we are going to be discussing. So I'll ask you to use this skill to actually rate how seriously those issues disturb you. And secondly, how much you think or you feel you need treatment or help for those problems. So that is called the client rating scale. The other thing I want to let you know, George, is that this is not a test. It is actually an interview to get accurate information. And so honesty is what is important. And do not be afraid to be honest because we shall treat your data confidentially. Should you feel uncomfortable giving an answer to a question, please do not feel obliged to do that. And also feel free to share with me any information that you think you would want to share with me about the issues we are going to be discussing. So thank you very much, George. Do you have any question for me so far?
The tool looks very big. Is it going to take the whole night?
Thank you, George. Actually, this tool is going to take between 50 minutes and 1 hour. And if it goes a little longer, not too much longer. So thank you for expressing your concern. It's valid. So are we ready to begin now, George?
I think we are.
Thank you. So participants, now we are going to the next page of our ASI. This is what we are calling the general information section. So I hope you're all there so that we can begin. So in the first section, we are going to put the ID number in G1. We said ID number is a number that your center may have assigned client George. So if there is, please put that number there. If there isn't, no problem. The second G2, we said, it's given a social security number here. In different countries, we use different identification numbers for our citizens. You may put a number here based on what you're familiar with. Now, G4, we are giving the date of admission. So do we assume George is admitted? This one we can actually give later when George is admitted. Let's assume today is the date of the interview, and so he's not yet admitted. He will be admitted later. Now, what is the date today? Someone raise your hand and tell us the date we are going to fill under G5. I want to know that you have not left me alone with my client. Yes, who's raising their hand? Grace? Yes, Grace? Yes, Grace, please unmute yourself and give the date.
Today's date, 16th.
16th of June. And you notice that you have been asked to give the month first, and then the day, and then the year. So we are going to give the month first, which is 06. The day is 16, so 16. The year is 2020. So what time are we beginning the interview? We are beginning the interview at 20:48. So you can indicate the time. And of course, when we finish, we shall indicate. Now, the way this time is given, it's given as if to put it on the 24-hour clock. So if your clock says 20:48 like mine, you indicate there 20 and 48 minutes. When we finish, you will also indicate the hours here and the minutes. Now, let us assume this is an intake interview. So we are going to put it as 1. So under G8, let us all score 1. Are we together?
Yes.
Now, the next G9, we are interviewing George in person. So we are going to code 1. Any questions so far? Please feel free to stop me. Now, here I'm going to ask George, G10, because G10 is about gender.
Hello, can I ask a question? You said?
Yes, please ask a question.
Yes,
First of all, you tell me who is speaking, and then ask.
Yeah, my name is Michael, and
yes,
my question is, on this G9,
yes.
It says, as this ASI must be in person. So why is 2 there? Why then telephone, since it must be in person?
Okay, thank you for your question. The reason 2 is there is because you may be doing this interview as a follow-up. Can you see number 8 has 2 things? It has intake for 1, and it has follow-up for 2. So if you put 2 under G8 follow-up, then you could as well do the follow-up through a telephone or a face-to-face. So that is why 2 is here, to be able to provide for you to do a follow-up, because a follow-up is allowed in telephone mode. Is that clear, Michael?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you too. So now we go to G10, gender, and I want to ask George a question. So George, thank you very much. What is your preferred gender? Is it male or female?
Well, it's not my preferred gender, it's the gender I find myself. I'm a man.
Thank you. So can we code for George, male? And again, you can see George is surprised at that question because for him, he's obviously identifying himself as male. But we also know there are clients we will come across who will tell you about something different. So that's why we have to ask the question and take care of everyone. Now, so G11, we give our initials. Sometimes your center may have a way of identifying who gave this interview. And so if your center has some code or you can use your initials, please put them under G11. So next we are going to go to G12. Now you notice G12 is a special question because of the circumstances that Moses told us. that if I discover, for example, George is not following what I am talking about, or George refuses to continue to respond, or I notice we are not communicating, maybe because he has a co-occurring disorder and his cognitive ability is impaired significantly, or he himself decides he doesn't want to continue, that is when we actually code number 12, and we will say, if it is the patient who terminated, we shall put 1. If it is the patient who refused, we shall put 2. If the patient is unable to respond, we shall put 3. If our nice client like George has no problem and is ready to continue, then we shall put N for not applicable. So I believe we all have N. The next section, we are going to put the address of George. So George, kindly, could you assist me with your full names and your address?
I am George Muremi.
Mm-hmm.
My residence is currently Yaba, Lagos, Nigeria.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So George gives us his address and we write it, including the city, the state, and the zip code as applies to our countries. You know, different countries have got different types of addresses. So you will adapt this to your specific country address mode. Then we go to G14. Now I see one question from Kennedy. Yes, Kennedy?
Good evening, ma'am. I noticed that between G12 and G14, there is no G13, even though we are talking about name and address.
Yes.
What is the explanation we give to our class?
Sorry? Okay, thank you. Your voice is breaking, so I didn't get to hear everything, but I did hear one part about missing G13.
For absence of G13.
Yes, so G13 is basically this space we are writing the address. Can you see where we are writing the address?
Yes.
Yes, so that takes care of G13. Then we go to now 14, G14, asks George a question. So here I'm going to ask George a question.
All right.
Kindly mute yourself, Kennedy, thank you. So George, how long have you lived at this address that you have just given me?
So 2 years now.
3 years now.
2
is
years.
It exactly 3 years or is it 3 years with some months?
It's 2 years, 3 months.
2 years and 3 months. Okay, so participants, what are we going to fill under G14?
Yeah, my name is Michael.
Yes, please say your name first so that I can know who's speaking.
Fatima is speaking.
Fatima, yes.
So the year we put 02 and the month we put 03.
Very good, 02 and 03. So George, is it exactly 3 months?
Approximately 3 months.
It's exactly 3 months. Remember why it's important to ask that is because maybe it is 3 months and 14 days. Maybe it is 3 months and 12 days. And you remember we have been advised that if it is 14 days and above, then we turn to the upper number. So that's why it's important to probe to clarify. Now we then go to G15. So George, in this residence that you have told me you live at, is it owned by you or your family?
No, it's a rental.
It is a rental. So what answer do we give in G15? What code? Raise your hand so that I can pick you to give the code for G15. Yes, I see. Jessica, help me identify who has raised their hand.
I see Samuel's hand raised.
Samuel, thank you. So Samuel, what do we give for G15?
Okay, for G15, we put 0.
We put 0 because the
we put 0.
Thank you. So we put 0.
0. I hope you heard me.
You. Yes, I did. Thank you very much. So we put 0 because the residence is not owned by George or his family. So the answer was no. So we put 0. If the residence was owned by George or by the family, we would have put 1 for yes. Then next, I'm going to ask George G16. So George, please tell me your date of birth.
I was born on 22nd December 1975.
So 22nd December 1975. So we are going to remember to fill the month first, followed by the day, and finally the year. Now G17, the sensitive question that we said. So George, of what race do you consider yourself? Is it white, non-Hispanic? Is it black, non-Hispanic? Is it American Indian? So you can read out this and show George so that they pick, and they may not necessarily make sense to George, these questions, or because he's not in the setting they were produced. But let's hear what George says. So George, what race do you consider yourself?
I am a pure African.
A pure African. So looking at our different options here, 1 to 9, where do we place George?
It will be
Yes.
2, Fatima.
Yes, Alero.
2.
So do we agree it is black, non-Hispanic?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. So that is G17. Then we go to G18. So George, do you have a religious preference?
Yes,
So would you like to tell me which one it is?
I am a Protestant.
You're a Protestant. So we score 1. That one is straightforward. Thank you. So George, I'm going to ask you another question. In the past 30 days, have you been in a controlled environment? By a controlled environment, I mean an environment where there was restriction of movement and there wasn't access to drugs or alcohol. It was restricted. Have you been in such an environment in the last 30 days?
And in this case, do you mean overnight or just a visit? Because I've been to hospital for an hour or 2. Does that constitute?
So you have been in hospital for an hour or 2. I really mean you staying there for some time, like at least overnight or for several days.
No, I've not been in any of the places overnight.
So you have not been to a hospital for more than a day or spent a night there?
No.
You have not been in a treatment center for alcohol or any drugs?
No.
And you have not been in any incarceration setting?
I've not been in incarceration. I've just been to the police station once or twice for drug issues, but those are police issues. We sort them out within an hour and you're out, yes.
Okay, thank you, George. So class, what do we rate for George?
1.
Under 19? Yes?
1.
1. Do we all agree? Okay, thank you. G20, what will be the answer? Okay, Grace has raised her hand. Yes, Grace?
For the fact that he has been to the police station, even if it's 1 hour he spent there, I feel it should supposed to be under 6, which is order.
Okay, so thank you for that, Grace, and your feedback is very valid. And I think it will be very helpful when we come to the legal status section. You remember we have a legal status section. So that answer that George has given will be very useful for that section. So this specific section is asking whether you have been in a restricted environment for a period of time. And remember, he has told us he's just been going into the police for some hours and sorting out and leaving. So he was not held. Remember the intention of the question. The intention of the question is to know whether during the last 30 days, George was in an environment where he was restricted from accessing drugs. So that when we come to the question, the section on drugs, and he says he has not used the last 30 days, we will know it's because he was in a restricted environment rather than by choice. So the intention of the question requires that we do not code that statement George has given, but that information is very important and you will need to remember it when you go to the legal status section. So thank you for that. Now, then we have G20, and G20 is asking how many days. If George had said yes, for example, if he had said he was in medical treatment for 1 week, for example, we would have asked him how many days. If he had said he was he was put in remand, you know, like after he went to the police, he was actually taken to remand, but later set free, we would have wanted to know how many days he was in remand. So the intention of this question is to know whether during the last 30 days, was there any one time George was in circumstances where he could not access drugs or alcohol? So that then we keep that in mind when we are asking him the questions for the next section, that is a section on alcohol and drugs. So that is basically the general information section. George, I want to thank you very much. Of course, in a normal setting, I will not thank George because we will not have ended. I will just tell him thank you very much for your honesty with helping give information on this general section. I will now next move to a different section, and so we shall transition him, and we are going to do that in the next class. So that is basically what we do with the general information section. Anybody that has a comment or question? I know we have gone overboard in 2 minutes. Any question?
Yes. I have a question.
Dionuka and then Fatima.
Can I go on?
Someone called Dionuka had raised their hand, but maybe you can go ahead of them because they are not speaking. Fatima?
Okay. Yes.
I'm speaking now.
Okay, okay, so Dionuka first and then Fatima.
Okay. Considering the amount of information and data we're gathering from this patient or these clients,
yes,
wouldn't it be proper for us to get an informed consent signed one before we start administering the RC to the patient for legal purposes?
Okay, thank you very much. Again, a very good question. I'll quickly give you my thoughts. Remember, when this client comes into your treatment setting, or whatever it is that you are actually doing this work, they are the requirements of consenting from your center. That should be followed, so that by the time you're coming to administer this tool, you have already gotten some consent to engage with the client. But we can discuss this more in our LMS. Fatima?
Yes, I have 2 questions. The first one, you said this instrument can only be administered to adults because children don't walk. But there are some adolescents of maybe between the ages of 15 to 17 who walks. They don't have any support from anywhere. So if they come for counseling and we're supposed to assess them, since they are working, they don't have support, can we use this instrument for them? That's number 1. Number 2, on the right-hand side of the general information, I saw a severity profile table. What do we do with that? And I saw a general information comment too. I see another additional test result. What do we do with all those columns?
Thank you very much. I will respond to your first question. The reason we are not encouraged to use this tool on non-adults is because of what we call validation and norming. When you develop a test, before you can say a test is valid and reliable to be used, you must test it against certain populations and get credible data that makes you say with confidence that it has been normed against all these populations. So for adolescents, we don't have evidence to say that it is necessarily a valid tool. So that is the reason why, even though you think that you could use it, it is not advisable by the authors of this tool. Now,
so at what age do we apply it now?
Sorry?
I say at what age now?
Adults. So your country knows what an adult is. You can use your legal definition of adults in your country. I know it does differ from country to country sometimes. Now, the other thing is your second question, yes, very quickly, is the first page of the general information. So you notice that we have additional test results, which are being called G21 up to G28. So should there be, as you carry out this test and you finish, maybe you're also doing other kinds of tests on the client. Maybe you're doing a drug test. Maybe you're doing like Moses. You remember Moses told us they do very many things at admission. They administer many tests. So if there are other tests or other information you're collecting about the client, then you will finally put it in this section at the end. At the same time, the severity profile is something you will fill at the very end. When you finish scoring across the tool, that's when you will come back to these 2 sections, the additional test results and the severity profile. So we're going to be talking about that at the end. The general information comments is where you record any comments you observed as you are asking each of these questions for this section. So I think we stop there because it is 6 minutes after time. Thank you for your patience. Let's continue interacting on the LMS. And once again, George, I want to thank you for being a very cooperative client. We hope to see you again tomorrow to continue with this interview. Thank you. So now I hand it over to Jessica.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. And I know that there was a request to take off on Thursday and have a Saturday session instead, but we were thinking we could start about half an hour later. So we wanted to ask everyone if that would be okay. So to start at whatever the time zones are. So if we normally start at 7:30 for you, it would be 8, or 5:30 for you, it would be 6. And we were wondering if that would be all right. For the
So
people
what
that
Jessica is asking is that we received a request from Fatima on behalf of some of you who are taking a course on motivational interviewing. You requested that we allow you to take the class. You would be late for the Thursday class, and you are requesting if we can move it to Saturday. But when we consulted, we said we didn't need to move the class to Saturday because we want to have a free Saturday after doing a lot of work with the ASI. And so we preferred that we start the class half an hour late on Thursday. So rather than start, when we start, we will start half an hour late to accommodate those who are coming from their other class. That is only for Thursday. And I hope we are all fine with that. So we shall end half an hour later so that we can accommodate the needs of the class. So if anybody has an objection, please let us know. Soliman, you raised your hand.
Yeah, can I
Yes,
say
Soliman.
something? This
Yes,
is Michael.
Soliman.
Okay.
Soliman, we need to hear you. We are not hearing you.
Solomon, could you type your question in the chat? We can't hear you. Oh, it's Solomon, yeah.
So if anybody has an objection to that, type in the chat. If not, then we shall assume we are satisfied with that, and Thursday we begin half an hour after the usual time. But we are getting, oh, Soliman is asking about G17. Oh, Soliman, I think we're going to respond to this in the LMS now that we already have closed the presentation. We shall look at it, and you can type in a little more information in the question so that we can understand what the question is about G17. So please do that in the chat. So I think that's fine. We will start half an hour after the usual time and end half an hour after the usual time, only for Thursday. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm grateful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, and Beatrice, it looks like there's a question in the chat for you specifically. But otherwise, if you don't have any more questions, good night, everyone. It was great to have you again.
Good night.
Yeah, we'll respond to those questions on email. Thank you and good night.